In some of my videos, I've discussed already the issue of nihilism in literature, whether it's a warning tale about nihilism, in which case you're talking about Dostoevsky, or whether you're talking about literature that's promoting nihilism in a kind of a propagandistic way, that kind of dumbs down the quality of art and literature. And that I want to talk about the latter problem, because I think that one of the ways that, as I've seen so far, and I've watched some videos about this, I'll tell you about in a few minutes, but I think one of the ways so far that I think that nihilism in literature has dumbed down the quality is that I think as writers, as many writers, we have all, not me personally, but many writers will confuse beauty with complexity. That it will look at, the writer will look at the more embellished or the more thoughtful style that you see in older literature, more classical kind of literature, and see it perhaps as an over display of sophistication. That it's the same way that a person might look at the way that a politician speaks and assume that it's a bunch of roundabout kind of word salad that doesn't really mean anything, and it's looked at with the same skepticism or cynicism. We don't really recognize it as actually an application of craft, of any kind of serious craft. And you notice another pattern. This is where nihilism comes into play, that when you look at the older eras, I think that sense of conviction, that sense of purpose that existed in those cultures, the European cultures, I think is partly what motivated people to pay more attention to the way that ideas were communicated. Obviously. But I think one of the major examples I could use that can really poke holes in this theory that beauty and complexity are the same thing is I remember when I've read children's books as I was growing up, like by these Victorian writers, very famous writers, like Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan. They were written very simply, but there's a big difference between plain and simple, right? They're beautiful, and they were not complex, but they were driven by a sense of purpose, and they were not, just in the same way that a chef would put a lot of thought into the ingredients, all the different, the little flavors, and it has to, I think, be approached very much the same way when we're dealing with this sort of thing. And this is something that I've been watching some more videos about there's a channel called Pen and Poison, where the content creator of the channel discusses her own kind of embarrassing experiences in university, where there's a lot of this sort of propagandistic stuff that going on, where she couldn't really express her own ideas very clearly, or she couldn't, I didn't mean to say that, she couldn't express her ideas honestly, is what I meant to say, without her getting in trouble with the university. But she also does point out the growing nihilism in literature and the way that it's dumbed it down. And that's one of the reasons I think why I've always tried to pay extra attention, because even despite the modern influences, I try to pay extra attention to, in my own fiction writing, particularly science fiction, to have everything be said in a way that is memorable, that leaves a lasting imprint, I think, in people's imaginations, and I think that's what's important.